Yo bar, what's up and what's happening? And welcome back to It's the Yo Bar series with me, Chris Harding. And I'd also like to welcome you back to the diabetes transformation course that I'm running here on It's the Yo Bar series. Today we're going to be looking at another macronutrient. Last time we looked at fats, and this time we're going to be focusing our attention on protein. So we're going to be looking at the do's and the don'ts of protein. The good thing about this video is there are a lot more do's than there are don'ts. Okay, guys, so protein is one of those things that I find when I'm working with clients really difficult to get them to consume more. So, when I'm working with my clients, and mainly I work with diabetic clients, I do work with some people who are struggling with weight and obesity, but mainly I work with people who are suffering with diabetes. What I do when I'm working with those individuals is I take over their diet. So, by taking over my client's diet, what I try to look at is installing the right amounts of macronutrients into their new food plan. And also, when I'm designing their food plan, I'm also designing meals and recipes and things that we've agreed that they're going to eat and things that they enjoy. So, when I'm looking at the macronutrient protein, I'm trying to make sure that that individual, that client of mine, is getting enough protein per day, and that I'm basically putting the amount of macronutrients in terms of protein back into their diet through the meals that I write for them. So when you're looking at the macronutrient protein and you're looking at diets and the recording of diets actually go back quite a long way. Some of the studies and recordings of diets that we can look back on are from roughly about the early 1800s, which basically means that we've got quite a vast, over 200 years worth of diet studies that have been done on protein. Now, when you look at these studies as an overall, every study that has been done on protein with people that consume higher amounts of protein or more protein, the study always comes back with the same answer. And the answer is that the overall individual has a healthier body. Their weight is lower, their waist circumference is lower, their metabolic diseases, such as diabetes, is also lower, and the individual is a lot healthier too. Also, when you're looking at protein, especially when you're looking at things such as consuming animal meat, protein has got a natural amount of fat that goes along with it. So when you cook animal meat, let's say you cook beef, so you're cooking a steak, it will have a certain amount of saturated and also unsaturated fat within that food source. And therefore, when you're looking at protein and you're looking at fat together, when you're cooking with it, you're not eating it as a processed food, but you're eating it as a more raw food. Studies show that the individual has a much lower amount of risk when it comes to metabolic disease. And the reason that is something to do with how the body responds to proteins, carbohydrates, and also fats. The body responds to all three macronutrients. So it responds to carbohydrate, it responds to fat, and it also responds to protein. But it doesn't spike so much when you consume fat. And it doesn't spike as much when you consume protein. In fact, the highest insulin spike that you get when you consume any macronutrient is carbohydrate. Now, that's fine, it doesn't matter. That is the way the body uses because it's instantaneous energy. So carbohydrate is instantaneous energy, and therefore it spikes insulin much faster. So there is a reason for that. However, when you're eating more processed foods that have been processed by manufacturers and food companies, what that does is it basically alters the body. And so the body tends to respond by spiking insulin even higher than it would do normally. So when you're eating a highly refined sugar, which is a carbohydrate, or you're eating a processed protein, such as a protein powder, or you're eating or consuming a processed oil, such as a vegetable oil, all of those macronutrients have been altered by the manufacturer, and the body just cannot process it properly. And therefore, it starts to create dysfunction. It starts to create dysfunction originally in the liver because the liver is basically trying to convert that food into energy. And if it can't convert it into energy, what it will do is it will store it as fat. And when it stores it as fat, it stores it as two types of fat. It stores it as subcutaneous fat, which is the fat on the outside of your torso and around your thighs and your hips. And it also stores it as visceral fat. And visceral fat is basically organ fat. And organ fat is a lot to do with your metabolic diseases such as diabetes, strokes, heart attacks, high amounts of cholesterol. The list goes on forever. Now, the problem with processed food doesn't just end there. It doesn't just end with the fact that your body stores fat in different places, such as subcutaneous fat and also visceral fat. What it starts to do is it starts to break down your metabolism, and it starts to have effects. Now, one of the things, if you are someone who suffers with type 2 diabetes, one of the side effects you might notice is that you go to the toilet a lot more frequently. You might find that you urinate when you're in bed, and you have to get up and you have to go to the toilet. And that's for a certain reason. The reason is because your pancreas, your liver, and also your kidneys are all responsible for producing hormones and also filtering things, filtering toxins and filtering waste. And you have basically a threshold, and your threshold is there for a reason. But if there's too much blood sugar inside your body from having highly processed foods and highly processed sugars, if there's too much glucose in the blood, basically what the body does as a side effect to the diabetes and the metabolic disease, which is caused by highly processed foods, what it does as a side effect is it urinates more frequently. And the reason why it urinates more frequently is because it's trying to dump sugar. It's trying to get sugar out of the body the best way it can. So it does that by going over the threshold, and it just empties sugar into the urine, which makes the individual urinate more frequently. It makes them a lot more thirsty as well, because the body is constantly trying to rehydrate and it's constantly trying to dump more and more sugar. So when you go back to things such as protein from a whole source, protein and the fat that comes with protein, especially from animal meat, and I'm not only talking about animal meat, but I'm also talking about things like fish, and dairy, and eggs, and things of that nature. They have got much, much, much lower chances or opportunity to be able to give you a metabolic disease because they haven't been processed. They're not processed foods, they're more whole foods. Yes, we are processing them by cooking them, but that's only a small natural process, or a process that we are used to by consuming cooked food. So, if you are someone who does suffer with side effects of diabetes, or you do suffer with type 2 diabetes, one of the best ways that you can cure your diabetes and reverse your diabetes is to start eating more whole foods. And when you start to look at things such as protein, such as animal meat or dairy or fish or eggs, things that have got more natural sources of protein in, they tend to have fat combined with them. And those natural fats also help to not only lower your weight, but lower the risk that you can get when eating processed foods. And that risk is things such as metabolic diseases. Those metabolic diseases, just to run through them quickly, are related to things such as cancer, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, cholesterol, diabetes, and also dementia. So I'd like to share a story with you, and the story is personal to me. So I'm someone who likes to keep active. I have a very active job, and I also like to weight train. And by weight training, I also consume quite a lot of protein. However, sometimes it's difficult to be able to get the amount of protein that you need. And so what I do as a natural side effect of being busy is consume things such as protein shakes or protein powder, which is great. I really enjoyed consuming them. They were like milkshakes, and I always felt that I was getting a really good hit of protein. I was getting the amount of grams that my body needed to be able to repair and regenerate muscle tissue. However, the one thing that I did notice when I was consuming protein shakes is that I always would retain a little bit of body fat around my abdomen. Okay. And I never really thought much of it. I just thought that's probably because I need to be a bit more stricter with my calories and things of that nature. And then I read a study, and the study actually shocked me. And I didn't really quite realize how bad protein powder was. Okay, so you've got protein powder, which is refined. Okay, so when you're consuming protein powder in a protein shake, it has been through a process. It is a processed form of protein. Therefore, when you consume it, because it's a powder, when you consume it, the body responds to it the same way as it would do sugar. Now, are there going to be some macronutrient benefits to having protein powder? There probably are. But in the long term, actually, what was happening to me when I was having those protein shakes is actually I was more than likely to store body fat, which I certainly wasn't trying to do, rather than to grow and support muscle tissue. Here comes the other kicker that I never realized. So let's say that I'm consuming my protein shakes and I'm also having quite protein rich meals. So, by consuming my protein shakes and also having really protein rich meals, I'm actually doing myself a disservice because the body cannot store protein the way that I originally thought it could. I thought that the more protein you had, the better. But actually, that's not entirely true. And there's a reason for that because your body can do two things: it can store fat and it can also store glucose, or it can store sugar, but it cannot store protein. And if you have too much protein, especially refined protein, what your body's more than likely to do is convert the molecule of protein, which is called a BCAA or a branched chain amino acid, and convert it into glucose. And when it converts it into glucose via function of the liver, it then stores it as fat, which is a process known as de novo lipogenesis. So basically, the more protein that I was eating, especially when I was drinking my protein shakes and having them as replacement meals, actually what I was doing was making myself fatter. And when I realized this, I actually thought to myself, holy crap, I'm actually consuming food that's actually making me fat. So here's what I did. What I did was I still enjoyed my protein shakes, but I tried to find a way to consume them more healthily. So rather than buying protein powder, I stopped doing that and I actually started to buy natural Greek yogurt. And in that natural Greek yogurt, what I'd do is I'd have about 200 grams of natural Greek yogurt, about 200 ml of either milk or soy milk, and I'd have a little bit of either orange juice, apple juice, or sometimes I'd have a little bit of honey just to sweeten it a margin. And then I'd put it in my protein shaker and I'd have a protein shake. It was a much more natural source of protein because it hadn't been so refined and it hadn't been so processed. And let me tell you that actually, within about 2 to 3 weeks of just doing that small change in my diet, I actually noticed that my body fat started to drop. And when I went on the biometric scales, when I weigh and measure and look at how much muscle tissue I've got, how much weight I am, and everything of that nature, when you're looking at the fat percentage, my fat percentage actually dropped by over 2%, which was, fantastic. So after realizing that I don't need that much protein to be able to maintain a really healthy and fit body, and also I don't want to store my protein as body fat, that just seems really unfair for all the effort that I'm going to. And also considering that protein is actually really expensive when you buy it, what I had to do is I had to recalibrate my nutrition a little bit and start to choose better forms of protein and go back to cooking more whole foods such as eggs and meat, fish, and dairy. Another thing is, as well, with protein is that protein, um, like all macronutrients, has had bad press and it's had good press. So one thing with protein is they say, oh, you don't need that much protein to be able to survive. But let's just take an individual who's trying to be more active or an individual who is more active. Now, there are many, many different studies on how many grams of protein you need per pound or per kilo of body weight. But when I look at clients, I basically give them a very simple ratio. The ratio is either 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Now, because my clients are all diabetic or they're people who struggle with weight, that's actually quite a lot of protein for them to consume. And by switching that amount of protein that they consume, they do slowly start to lose body weight. But if you're finding that you're having a little bit too much protein and you can't consume the amount of protein that I'm recommending you have, at least try to up the amount of protein that you have, and always try to make sure that they come from natural sources of food and that they're not highly processed. As I said, highly processed protein as well as highly processed fats and highly processed carbohydrates, such as things like sugar, are much more likely to have a negative effect on your health. So another thing that I would watch out for just before we wrap up here, guys, is that I'd also watch out for two different types of things. The first thing that I'd watch out for when it comes to protein is certain types of diets. I wouldn't necessarily go for a protein strict diet, and I wouldn't restrict your protein diet. Try to choose the proteins that you enjoy. So if you don't like eating that much meat, or if you've got something against eating meat, then that's absolutely fine. If you can have more of a pescatarian type diet, then perhaps that suits you. But as long as you're trying to get sources of protein into your diet, that is the main thing. When it comes to people who are more vegetarian and they're trying to consume protein, there are lots of different sources out there for you to be able to, such as tofu and things of that nature. That is fine, but you just need to remember that whenever you're consuming higher amounts of vegetation, such as lentils and beans and things of that nature, there's also more carbohydrates with those as well. So the likelihood that you're not getting as much protein in is probably going to be a little bit higher. So the two things that I would watch out for are to make sure that you're happy as to where your protein source is coming from. I think that's really important for every individual. And the other thing is as well is don't follow a protein diet. Just increase the amount of protein that you have. And as long as you're enjoying that protein, it's going to suit you a lot more. The other great thing about protein is it's really filling. So if you decide to have a little bit more protein rather than having something as more carbohydrate, then basically what that's going to do is that's going to help you to lower your overall weight. It's going to help you lower your blood sugar levels, and it's also going to start to tackle those problems such as type 2 diabetes. So guys, I hope you found this video useful, and please like and also subscribe to the channel. If you've got any comments, then please leave a comment below and I will get back to you. So guys, always try to remember to consume your protein from more whole food sources and try not to have so much processed manufactured protein. Reverse your type 2 diabetes, be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bar.
It's the Yo Series.